The war had lasted 47 years, and nobody could remember anymore why it had started. Some said it began over mining rights to a platinum-rich asteroid field near the Kelvar system. Others claimed it was about an insult delivered by a Cathari diplomat to a Vrelian queen. The truth was buried under nearly 5 decades of death, destruction, and deep-seated hatred between two of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. The Vrelian Dominion controlled the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy. They were an insectoid race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and chitinous armor that could stop small arms fire. Their ships were brutal and efficient, designed to swarm enemy positions with overwhelming numbers. The Vrelians believed in honor through combat and saw warfare as the purest form of diplomatic expression. The Cathari alliance dominated the western sectors. They were an avian species with keen eyesight and faster reflexes than any other known race. Their feathers ranged from deep blues to vibrant golds, and their hollow bones made them surprisingly fragile in hand-to-hand combat. But what they lacked in physical strength, they made up for in tactical brilliance. Cathari battle strategies were studied in military academies across the galaxy. Their ships moved like dancers through space, always 3 moves ahead of their opponents. For 47 years, these two giants had been locked in a stalemate. Every battle ended with roughly equal losses on both sides. Every conquered world was retaken within months. Every strategic advantage was countered by an equally clever defense. The galaxy had become a chessboard where neither player could achieve checkmate, and the pieces were real people dying by the millions. The neutral zones between their territories had become graveyards. Debris fields stretched for millions of kilometers, the scattered remains of thousands of ships. Planets that once housed thriving colonies were now barren rocks, their atmospheres burned away by orbital bombardment. Species that had tried to remain neutral found themselves forced to choose sides or face destruction from both. The Galactic Council met regularly, but accomplished nothing. Half the council members were Vrelian allies, the other half supported the Cathari. Every vote ended in deadlock. Peace proposals were drafted and immediately rejected. Ceasefire agreements lasted days before someone violated them. The smaller species watched helplessly as their trade routes collapsed and their economies crumbled under the weight of a war that had nothing to do with them. Humanity watched too, but from a distance. They were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 80 years earlier. Their first contact with alien life had been peaceful, a chance encounter with a Cathari exploration vessel near what humans called the Epsilon Eridani system. The Cathari had been polite but dismissive, filing a report that designated humanity as a pre-industrial species achieving early spaceflight through crude chemical propulsion. That assessment had stuck. When humans finally developed their own FTL drives, the galaxy barely noticed. Human ships were slow compared to Vrelian dreadnoughts. Human weapons were weak compared to Cathari plasma cannons. Human diplomatic overtures to join the Galactic Council were acknowledged and then quietly shelved. To the ancient civilizations that had been traveling the stars for millennia, humans were little more than children playing with toys they barely understood. This suited humanity just fine. They established small colonies on uninhabited worlds, set up modest trading posts on neutral stations, and carefully observed the galactic community. They learned languages, studied cultures, and most importantly, they learned from the mistakes they saw others making. Earth had nearly destroyed itself 3 times in nuclear fire before finally achieving lasting peace. Humans knew what unchecked warfare looked like, and they wanted no part of it. The human government, now a unified Earth Council, had made a decision early on. Humanity would not build a military fleet designed for conquest. Instead, they would focus on construction, on building, on creating rather than destroying. It was a philosophy born from the ashes of their own brutal history, and it set them on a very different path from every other spacefaring civilization. While the Vrelians built bigger guns and the Cathari designed faster ships, humans built factories. Massive orbital platforms that could process asteroids into refined materials. Constructor vessels that could assemble space stations in weeks rather than years. Mining ships that could strip an entire moon of resources without ever touching its surface. The technology wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't impressive to military minds, but it was efficient in ways the galaxy had never seen. For 47 years, humans watched the war and said nothing. They traded with both sides when possible, always staying carefully neutral. They accepted refugees from devastated worlds and gave them jobs in their construction projects. They took notes, made calculations, and slowly, quietly, built something that nobody else was paying attention to. Then, on the 47th anniversary of the war's beginning, something changed. A single human vessel appeared at the edge of the neutral zone Beta 7, the largest buffer space between Vrelian and Cathari territories. The ship was enormous, easily 3 times the size of a Vrelian battlecruiser, but initial scans showed something puzzling. It had minimal weapons, barely enough to defend against pirates. Its armor was thick but not military grade. Its energy signature suggested massive industrial systems rather than combat readiness. The ship transmitted on all frequencies in both Vrelian and Cathari languages, as well as a dozen other galactic tongues. The message was simple and direct. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Human Starship Perseverance. We request permission to enter the neutral zone. We have come to end this war. We will not fire a single shot. Please respond." The message reached Vrelian High Command within minutes. Commander Thrazakor, a decorated veteran of 300 battles, read the transmission and clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his kind. "The humans think they can end our war? With one ship? This is either incredible arrogance or a very elaborate joke." On the Cathari flagship Soaring Dawn, Admiral Krisha ruffled her golden feathers in amusement. "The primitive species sends us one vessel and claims they will bring peace? Without weapons? What do they plan to do? Bore us into submission with construction reports. But curiosity is a powerful force, especially after 47 years of predictable warfare. Both commanders had fought this war for decades. They knew every Vrelian tactic and every Cathari counter-tactic. They had studied each other's strategies until they could predict fleet movements months in advance. The appearance of something genuinely unexpected was intriguing, even if it came from a species nobody took seriously. Thrazakor consulted with his tactical officers. The human ship was alone and apparently unarmed. It posed no obvious threat. Destroying it would accomplish nothing, and might anger the neutral species who saw humans as harmless traitors. Allowing it into the neutral zone cost nothing, and might provide some entertainment before the next scheduled offensive. Grant them passage, Thrazakor decided, and prepare a scanning team. I want to know everything about that ship. If the humans have developed some new weapon, we need to know about it. Krisha reached a similar conclusion aboard the Soaring Dawn. Let them come, she told her officers. We will learn what we can from their ship's design. Even primitive species sometimes stumble upon useful innovations. And if they truly believe they can end this war with words and no weapons, then we will at least have an amusing story to tell when this is over. Both fleets transmitted their approval. The human ship, the Perseverance, began moving into the neutral zone at a steady, unhurried pace. It made no aggressive maneuvers. Its shields remained at minimal power. It simply drifted toward the exact center point between the two massive fleets, broadcasting its approach every step of the way. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Perseverance and watched the tactical display. She was a tall woman with dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with years of experience. She had been a construction engineer before joining the Earth Council's space program, and she had personally overseen the building of 15 orbital stations. She understood stress tolerances and load-bearing calculations better than most people understood basic math. Both fleets are holding position, her tactical officer reported. No weapons locks detected. They're scanning us pretty heavily, though. Let them scan, Vasquez said calmly. They won't find any weapons because we didn't bring any. How long until we reach the designated coordinates? 40 minutes at current speed. Vasquez nodded and turned to her communications officer. Prepare the second transmission, and make sure the holographic systems are ready. We're going to need to make a very good first impression. Around her, the crew of the Perseverance worked with quiet efficiency. They were not soldiers. Most of them were engineers, fabrication specialists, resource management experts, and system designers. They wore simple blue uniforms without any military insignia. Their ship hummed with the sound of industrial machinery rather than charging weapons. In the space around them, two of the galaxy's most powerful military forces waited with weapons hot and shields raised. Thousands of warships bristled with enough firepower to crack planets. Millions of soldiers stood ready to respond to any threat. The finest military minds in the galaxy watched and calculated and prepared for whatever trick the humans might be planning. None of them understood what was about to happen. None of them could have predicted what humanity had built or what it meant. They thought in terms of weapons and warfare, of tactics and strategy, of conquest and defeat. They had been fighting for 47 years, and they had forgotten that there were other ways to win. The Perseverance continued its slow, steady approach toward the center of the neutral zone. On board, Captain Vasquez checked her chronometer and allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had learned many things from Earth's violent history. They had learned about the cost of war and the value of peace. They had learned that the biggest gun did not always win. And most importantly, they had learned that sometimes the best way to end a fight was not to throw a harder punch, but to make punching irrelevant. In 40 minutes, two galactic superpowers were about to receive an education in human thinking. The war that had lasted 47 years was about to face something it had never encountered before. Not a bigger weapon or a smarter strategy, but a completely different philosophy about what it meant to win. The Perseverance reached the designated coordinates exactly on schedule. Captain Vasquez had insisted on perfect punctuality. First impressions mattered, and she wanted both sides to understand that humans were serious people who did exactly what they said they would do. The moment the ship stopped moving, Vasquez sent the second transmission. This one was longer and more formal, addressed directly to the military commanders of both fleets. Commander Thrazakor of the Vrelian Dominion and Admiral Krisha of the Cathari Alliance. Humanity formally requests a temporary ceasefire for the purposes of diplomatic discussion. We invite both of you, along with your senior staff, to board the Perseverance. We understand you have been fighting for 47 years. We believe we have something that will interest you both. The ceasefire need only last 24 hours. After that, if you choose to resume combat, we will not interfere. But we ask that you give us 1 day to present our proposal. On the Vrelian command ship, Thrazakor discussed the invitation with his officers. It was highly unusual. Battlefield meetings typically happened on neutral stations with heavy security. Boarding an unknown vessel, even an apparently unarmed one, carried significant risk. It could be a trap, his security chief warned. The humans might have some weapon we cannot detect. They could be planning to take hostages. But Thrazakor had not survived 300 battles by being reckless or overly cautious. He understood calculated risks. If the humans wanted to attack us, they would not send one ship to face 2 entire fleets. And if they somehow managed to capture me, you would simply promote my second and continue the attack. I have curiosity about what these primitives think they can offer us. Prepare my shuttle and an honor guard. We will see what the humans have to show us. Admiral Krisha reached a similar conclusion. The Cathari valued knowledge above almost everything else, and the opportunity to study human technology up close was worth a small risk. She selected her best tactical analyst to accompany her and ordered her fleet to maintain combat readiness while she was gone. 4 hours later, 3 shuttles approached the Perseverance. 2 carried the alien commanders and their staff. The third carried a mix of Vrelian and Cathari security personnel who had agreed to work together long enough to ensure their leaders' safety. It was perhaps the only cooperative effort between the 2 species in 47 years. The Perseverance opened its main hangar bay to receive them. As the shuttles landed, their occupants got their first real look at the interior of a human vessel. What they saw confused them. The hangar was enormous, easily large enough to hold 20 shuttles. But it was not a military space. There were no weapons emplacements, no defensive positions, no signs of combat readiness. Instead, the walls were lined with fabrication equipment, assembly robots, and material processing units. It looked more like a factory floor than anything related to warfare. Captain Vasquez waited for them at the base of the landing ramps with a small delegation of human officers. She wore her simple blue uniform and carried no weapons. Her entire demeanor suggested calm professionalism rather than military bearing. Commander Thrazakor, Admiral Krisha, welcome aboard the Perseverance. Thank you for accepting our invitation. If you will follow me, I will take you to our main conference center where we can talk comfortably. Thrazakor clicked his mandibles skeptically as he looked around the hangar. This is a strange warship, Captain Vasquez. I see construction equipment but no weapons. I see robots but no soldiers. What kind of vessel is this? Vasquez smiled slightly. That is exactly what we are here to discuss, Commander. But to answer your immediate question, The Perseverance is not a warship at all. It is something entirely different, and I think you will find that difference very interesting. She led them through corridors that reinforced the first impression. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but nothing looked military. The walls displayed schematics for construction projects rather than tactical maps. The crew members they passed wore engineering gear rather than combat armor. The whole ship felt more like a university research facility than anything designed for war. The conference room was large and circular, with a massive holographic projector at its center. Comfortable chairs had been arranged around it, sized appropriately for both Vrelian and Cathari physiology. Refreshments had been provided, showing that humans had done their research on what both species could safely consume. Once everyone was seated, Vasquez stood at the center of the room and activated the holographic display. An image of the Perseverance appeared, slowly rotating to show its full structure. Before we discuss why we are here, let me tell you what this ship is. The Perseverance is not a battleship, not a cruiser, not a destroyer. It is a mobile manufacturing facility, a mining processor, and a constructor ship combined into one vessel. It was designed and built for a single purpose, to create things rather than destroy them. Admiral Krisha leaned forward, her keen eyes studying the hologram. You built a factory ship the size of a dreadnought? That seems inefficient. Why not build your factories on planets or stations where they would be safer? Because, Vasquez replied, we wanted the ability to build anywhere at any time without being dependent on fixed locations. The Perseverance can travel to an asteroid field, process the raw materials, and construct whatever is needed on site. It is completely self-sufficient. Thrazkor made a dismissive gesture with one of his forearms. This is all very impressive for a civilian vessel, Captain. But what does it have to do with our war? Do you think you can convince us to stop fighting by showing us construction equipment? No, Commander. I think I can convince you to stop fighting by demonstrating what that construction equipment can do. Vasquez changed the holographic display. What you are about to see is not a simulation. This is a live feed from our hangar bay where my crew is currently working. The hologram switched to show the interior of the massive hangar they had just walked through. A pile of raw materials sat in one corner, scrap metal, processed minerals, and various components. As they watched, a team of robots and human technicians began working with incredible speed and coordination. The materials were fed into fabrication units, processed, shaped, and assembled. We are going to build a fully functional shuttle from raw materials, Vasquez explained. This will take approximately 1 hour. While we wait, let me explain what humanity is offering. She changed the display again, this time showing a devastated planet. The world had been beautiful once, but orbital bombardment had left it scarred and lifeless. Cities were ruins, forests were ash, oceans were polluted toxic soup. This is Verith Prime, Vasquez said quietly. It was a Vrelian colony world with 12 million inhabitants. The Cathari bombed it 18 months ago as part of the Battle of the Verith system. According to our analysis, it would take the Vrelian Dominion approximately 30 years to rebuild this world using conventional methods. Thrazkor's mandibles tightened. He remembered Verith Prime. It had been a beautiful world, and its loss had been a painful blow to Vrelian morale. You mock us by showing our defeats, human? No, Commander. I am showing you what we can rebuild. Vasquez changed the display once more. This time it showed the same planet but transformed. Cities gleamed with new construction. Green spaces had been restored. Infrastructure was modern and efficient. Using human construction methods and the fleet we have prepared, we could restore Verith Prime to its former glory in 6 months. Not 30 years. 6 months. The room fell silent. Both Thrazkor and Krisha stared at the hologram, trying to process what they were hearing. Impossible, Krisha said finally. No civilization has that kind of construction capability. It would require resources beyond imagining. It requires efficiency beyond your current understanding. Vasquez corrected gently. Humans have spent the last 80 years perfecting rapid construction techniques. We have studied the way every spacefaring species builds, and we have found ways to do it faster, cheaper, and more effectively. We can process materials at rates you would consider impossible. We can fabricate components using methods you have never seen, and we can coordinate construction efforts with a level of precision that comes from decades of focused research. She gestured to the live feed from the hangar. The shuttle was already taking shape, its frame complete and its systems being installed. As you can see, we are not exaggerating our capabilities. Thrazkor stood and walked closer to the hologram, studying the restored version of Varith Prime with intense focus. What is your price for this, Captain? Why would humans offer to rebuild our worlds? What do you gain? That is the question, isn't it? Vasquez brought up a new display showing both Vrelian and Cathari territories. Here is what humanity is offering. We will rebuild every world that has been damaged or destroyed in this war. Every single one. Vrelian colonies, Cathari settlements, neutral planets caught in the crossfire. We will restore them all. We will do this work at no cost to either of you. We will not claim territory. We will not demand political concessions. We will simply build. Nothing is free, Krisha said sharply. Every species in the galaxy knows this truth. You must want something in return. Vasquez nodded slowly. You are correct, Admiral. We do want something. We want both sides to agree to a permanent ceasefire. We want you to allow human observers to oversee the reconstruction. And most importantly, we want you to understand that we are going to do this whether you agree or not. The room erupted in confusion. Both commanders started speaking at once, their staffs arguing loudly in multiple languages. Vasquez waited patiently for the noise to die down. Let me be very clear, she said once she had their attention again. Humanity has decided that this war has gone on long enough. We have watched 47 years of senseless destruction, and we are tired of seeing species tear themselves apart over grievances that nobody can even remember anymore. So we are offering you a choice. You can accept our help willingly, work with us to rebuild and take credit for ending the war. Or you can refuse, keep fighting, and watch as we rebuild everything you destroy faster than you can destroy it. Thrazkor's voice was dangerous and low. You threaten us? One ship against 2 fleets? No, Commander. I am not threatening you. Vasquez smiled and gestured at the hangar feed. The shuttle was complete, its engines already running test cycles. 1 hour exactly as promised. I am simply explaining reality. In the hangar bay, you just watched us build a fully functional shuttle from scrap in 1 hour. 1 hour, Commander. Now imagine what we could do in a day, in a week, in a month. She pulled up another display, this one showing a star map. Hundreds of red dots appeared throughout Vrelian and Cathari space. These are human ships. Right now, at this very moment, 200 constructor vessels like the Perseverance are positioning themselves throughout your territories. They are not warships. They carry no weapons, but they are ready to begin reconstruction immediately. Admiral Krisha stood abruptly, her feathers ruffled in agitation. This is an invasion. You send hundreds of ships into our space without permission. They are in neutral space and unclaimed systems, Vasquez corrected. We are not violating anyone's territory. But Admiral, imagine what happens if you try to continue this war. You bomb a Vrelian colony. Within days, human constructors arrive and rebuild it. You destroy a Cathari space station. Within a week, we replace it with a better one. Every victory you achieve becomes meaningless because we erase the damage faster than you can create it. The implications began to sink in. Thrazakor sat back down heavily, his tactical mind already running through scenarios. Krisha remained standing, but her anger had transformed into something more thoughtful. Why? Thrazakor asked finally. Why do humans care about our war? What drives you to do this? Vasquez's expression became somber. She brought up a final hologram, this one showing Earth during its worst periods of human history. Wars, nuclear weapons, devastated cities, suffering on a massive scale. Because we have been where you are now, Commander. Humanity fought itself for thousands of years. We came within hours of making our homeworld uninhabitable. We know what it is like to hate so deeply that destruction seems like the only answer, and we know what it costs to finally step back from that edge. She looked at both commanders directly. We are offering you what we wish someone had offered us. A way to stop, a reason to choose building over destroying, a chance to be remembered as the leaders who ended the war, rather than the ones who kept it going until nothing was left worth fighting for. The conference room was silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems. On the holographic display, the newly constructed shuttle lifted off from the hangar bay and began a perfect test flight around the Perseverance. Captain Vasquez let that silence stretch for a long moment before speaking again. We are not asking you to make a decision today. Take time to think. Consult with your governments. But know this, humanity has already made our decision. Starting tomorrow, we begin rebuilding the damaged worlds in your territories. You can work with us or against us, but either way, the reconstruction begins. The only question is whether you want to be part of it, or whether you want to be remembered as the commanders who kept fighting a war that no longer mattered. The alien commanders left the Perseverance with more questions than answers. Their security teams had performed detailed scans of the human vessel, confirming what Captain Vasquez had told them. The ship was exactly what she claimed, a massive construction facility with minimal weapons and maximum manufacturing capability. But confirmation did not bring comfort. It brought calculation. Commander Thrazkor returned to his flagship and immediately called a strategic meeting with his senior staff. In the Vrelian military tradition, he laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The humans have created something we did not anticipate. They have turned construction into a weapon without building a single gun. Our analysts have reviewed their capabilities and the reports are concerning. If they can truly build as fast as they demonstrated, then our entire military strategy becomes problematic. His chief tactical officer pulled up projections on the command center displays. If we continue offensive operations and the humans rebuild what we destroy, we face several issues. First, resource expenditure becomes unsustainable. Every missile, every bomb, every orbital strike costs us materials and energy. If the targets are rebuilt immediately, we waste those resources with no strategic gain. Second, morale among our forces will suffer when they see their victories erased within days. Third, and most troubling, neutral species and our own alliance members will question why we continue fighting if the destruction is meaningless. Thrazkor clicked his mandibles in agreement. Run scenario simulations. I want to know what happens if we attempt to attack the human constructor fleet. Can we destroy them before they complete their rebuilding operations? The tactical officer worked for several hours before returning with results that Thrazkor found deeply unsettling. The human ships are not warships, but they are incredibly resilient. Their armor is designed to withstand asteroid impacts during mining operations. Their shields are built to handle solar radiation and debris fields. Destroying even one constructor vessel would require sustained fire from multiple heavy cruisers. With 200 of these ships spread across the neutral zones, we would need to divert approximately 60% of our fleet to eliminate them all. And if we do that, the Cathari would have numerical superiority in every major conflict zone. We would lose key systems within weeks. The war would be over, and we would not be the victors. Similar conversations were happening aboard the Cathari flagship. Admiral Krisha had always prided herself on seeing 3 moves ahead of her opponents. But the human strategy had caught her completely off guard. They have weaponized economics, she told her strategy council. Not in the traditional sense of trade embargoes or resource denial, but by making warfare itself economically impossible. If we cannot achieve lasting damage to our enemy, then every battle becomes a net loss for both sides. Her senior analyst, a brilliant young Cathari named Shendar, expanded on the implications. We must also consider the political dimensions, Admiral. Several minor members of our alliance have already sent unofficial inquiries to the human ships. They want to know if humanity will help rebuild their damaged infrastructure. The humans have apparently said yes to all of them. Regardless of their alliance status, this puts our coalition at risk. Krisha ruffled her feathers thoughtfully. Because if neutral worlds and our own allies can get reconstruction help from humans without cost, they have no incentive to remain loyal to us. They can simply declare neutrality and benefit from human assistance. Exactly. And there is another factor we must consider. The human demonstration showed construction speed that exceeds our best capabilities by a factor of 10. If we were to attempt replicating their methods, it could revolutionize our entire industrial capacity. But that would require cooperation with humans, which means accepting their terms for ending the war. While the commanders debated strategy, humanity acted. True to Captain Vasquez's word, the human constructor fleet began operations exactly 24 hours after the meeting aboard the Perseverance. Their first target was a world called Talos 4, a former agricultural colony that had been devastated 3 years earlier in a border skirmish. Talos 4 had been a beautiful world once, known for its amber grain fields and crystal-clear rivers. The fighting had been brief but intense. Orbital bombardment had scorched 30% of the arable land. Ground combat had destroyed the capital city. Chemical weapons had poisoned 2 major water sources. The surviving population had been evacuated, and the world had been written off as a loss by both sides. Cleanup and restoration would take decades, and neither faction had the resources to spare. 3 human constructor ships arrived in orbit around Talos IV on the second day after the meeting. They were smaller than the Perseverance, but still massive by any military standard. They immediately began deploying hundreds of smaller craft, construction drones, atmospheric processors, and soil remediation units. The Galactic News Network, which had maintained neutral status throughout the war by staying in everyone's bad graces equally, sent a reporting team to Talos IV. What they broadcast shocked the entire galaxy. The human operation was like nothing anyone had ever seen. Construction drones worked in perfect coordination, guided by artificial intelligence systems of extraordinary sophistication. They landed in the ruins of the capital city and began clearing rubble at impossible speeds. Materials were sorted, processed, and either recycled into new construction materials or safely disposed of. Within 6 hours, the first new buildings were going up. Not temporary shelters, but permanent structures built to galactic standard codes. By the end of the first day, an entire city block had been reconstructed, complete with power systems, water purification, and communications infrastructure. But the humans were not just rebuilding what had been destroyed. They were improving it. The new buildings were more efficient, using less energy and producing less waste. The city layout had been redesigned for better traffic flow and emergency access. Green spaces were integrated throughout, providing parks and gardens where none had existed before. Above the planet, other human ships worked on environmental restoration. Atmospheric processors began scrubbing pollutants from the air. Orbital platforms deployed satellites to monitor and guide the cleanup efforts. Specialized drones descended into the poisoned water sources and began deploying filtration systems that would take years to complete their work, but required no maintenance or oversight. The GNN reporter, a 4-armed Zentari named Clicks, broadcast live footage with barely contained amazement. "This is unprecedented in galactic history. I am watching a team of human engineers rebuild an entire city district in the time it would normally take to file the construction permits. The efficiency is staggering. The coordination is perfect, and according to the human project manager I spoke with, this is just the beginning. They plan to have basic infrastructure restored across the entire planet within 3 standard weeks." The broadcast went viral across every civilized system in the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly learned their name. Refugees from devastated worlds watched the footage and felt something they had not felt in years: hope. But the real impact was political. Within 48 hours of the Talos IV operation beginning, 12 minor worlds declared their intention to withdraw from the war. They were not choosing sides, they were choosing humans. They sent official requests for reconstruction assistance, and the humans accepted every single one without hesitation. Commander Thrazakor watched the news broadcasts with growing concern. His intelligence division had confirmed that 6 of those 12 worlds had been Vrelian Alliance members. The defections were not motivated by betrayal or enemy influence. They simply saw no reason to remain in a war when there was a better option available. "This is how our alliance crumbles," he told his council, "not through military defeat but through irrelevance. The humans offer something we cannot match, hope for a future that is not defined by war." Admiral Krisha faced similar problems. The Cathari alliance was built on mutual defense and shared tactical interests. But if member worlds could get protection and reconstruction from a neutral third party, the alliance's fundamental purpose evaporated. On the 5th day after the Talos IV operation began, something significant happened. A small Vrelian patrol encountered a Cathari supply convoy near the Talos system. Under normal circumstances, this would have resulted in immediate combat. Both sides would have opened fire, and the engagement would have lasted until one side retreated or was destroyed. Instead, both commanders held their fire. They watched each other across the distance of space, weapons charged but not firing. After 10 minutes of tense silence, both forces withdrew in opposite directions without a shot fired. The incident was not officially reported by either side, but word spread quickly through both military organizations. Soldiers began asking questions. If the humans could rebuild anything that was destroyed, what was the point of fighting? What were they actually accomplishing by continuing the war? Morale, that intangible factor that determined the success or failure of military campaigns, began to shift. It was not dramatic or sudden. There were no mass desertions or refusals to fight. But throughout both fleets, a subtle change occurred. Orders were followed more slowly. Aggressive actions were questioned more openly. Soldiers looked at the news reports from Talos 4 and wondered if maybe there was a better way. On the 10th day, Captain Vasquez invited both commanders back to the Perseverance. This time, the invitation included visual footage of the reconstruction progress on Talos 4. The transformation was stunning. What had been a dead world was coming back to life with remarkable speed. "Gentlemen," Vasquez said as they reviewed the footage together, "I want to be clear about something. We are not doing this to embarrass either of you. We are not trying to prove human superiority. We are doing this because we believe it is right, and because we have the capability to do it. But I want you to understand the position you are now in." She brought up a galactic map showing the war zones. Several areas were now marked in neutral gray rather than Vrelian red or Cathari blue. These are systems that have withdrawn from the conflict in the past 10 days. We have begun reconstruction operations in all of them. Within a month, these worlds will be more prosperous than they were before the war. Their populations will have no interest in returning to combat. Your alliances are fracturing, not through military pressure but through simple economics and self-interest. Thrazkor studied the map with his tactical eye. You are essentially conquering through construction, taking territory without firing a shot. No, Commander, we are not taking anything. These worlds remain independent. We claim no authority over them. We simply rebuild and leave. If they choose to resume hostilities after we are done, that is their decision. But I think you will find that populations who have seen their homes restored have very little appetite for more destruction. Admiral Krisha's sharp eyes had caught something else on the map. You have begun operations in systems on both sides of the conflict. You are rebuilding Vrelian worlds and Cathari colonies without distinction. Yes, Vasquez confirmed. We told you from the beginning that we would rebuild everything damaged in this war. We meant it. We do not choose sides. We only choose building over destroying. She switched the display to show a new image, a detailed report on the economic costs of the war. Your military budgets have consumed resources that could have transformed your civilizations. The Vrelian Dominion spends 42% of its gross domestic product on military operations. The Cathari Alliance spends 38%. Imagine what your people could achieve if those resources were redirected to peaceful development. You make it sound so simple, Thrazkor said. But there is honor to consider. Pride. The memory of those who have fallen in this conflict. We cannot simply forget 47 years of war. Vasquez's expression became serious. Commander, I served in the Earth military during the last corporate wars before unification. I lost friends in combat. I understand the weight of sacrifice and the desire to make sure those deaths meant something. But continuing a war that can no longer be won does not honor the fallen. It simply adds more names to the memorial walls. She brought up footage from Earth's history, images of human conflicts and their aftermath. We honored our dead by learning from their sacrifice. We built a better world so that future generations would not have to fight the same battles. That is how you give meaning to loss, not by perpetuating the violence, but by choosing to evolve beyond it. The meeting ended without any formal agreements, but both commanders left with much to consider. As their shuttles departed, Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the Perseverance and watched them go. Her first officer joined her, looking out at the two massive fleets that still faced each other across the neutral zone. Do you think they will agree to peace, Captain? They do not have to agree, Vasquez replied. They just have to stop fighting, and we are making it increasingly difficult for them to find reasons to continue. Every day we rebuild another world. We demonstrate that destruction is not inevitable. Eventually, the weight of that evidence becomes impossible to ignore. And if they do not stop, if they keep fighting despite everything we are doing? Vasquez smiled slightly. Then we keep building. We build faster than they can destroy. We build so much and so well that the entire galaxy sees the difference between our methods and theirs. We build until choosing to destroy becomes obviously absurd. We have patience and we have resources and we have something they do not have. We have already learned this lesson. They are still learning it, but they will understand eventually. Everyone always does. 3 weeks after the human constructor fleet began operations, Commander Thrazkor faced a crisis he had never expected. It was not a military defeat or a strategic setback. It was a simple petition signed by 14,000 Vrelian soldiers requesting transfer to non-combat roles. The petition was respectful and properly formatted according to military regulations. It cited no grievances with command and made no accusations of wrongdoing. The soldiers simply stated that they wished to participate in reconstruction efforts rather than continue fighting a war that seemed to have lost its purpose. Thrazakor read the petition 3 times, trying to find some angle of attack, some way to dismiss it as mutinous or disloyal. But it was neither. It was just soldiers asking to be allowed to build instead of destroy. Under normal circumstances, such a request would be denied immediately and the soldiers would return to their duties. But these were not normal circumstances. The petition had been made public before it reached command. News services across the galaxy had already reported on it. Images of Vrelian soldiers, proud warriors of a militaristic society, asking to be allowed to help with reconstruction, were spreading through every communication network. If Thrazakor denied the request, he would look like a warmonger forcing his troops to fight an unpopular war. If he granted it, he would lose a significant portion of his force and signal that even Vrelian command doubted the war's value. He made the only choice that seemed viable. He granted the transfers but classified them as temporary assignments to evaluate human construction methods for potential military applications. It was a face-saving measure that fooled nobody, but it allowed the soldiers to leave with honor intact. Admiral Krisha faced different but equally challenging problems. The Cathari alliance had always prided itself on logical decision-making and tactical superiority, but logic was now pointing in a very uncomfortable direction, and her strategist could not find a way around it. Her chief economist presented a report that laid out the situation with devastating clarity. Admiral, we have run every simulation we can devise. In every scenario where we continue offensive operations against the Vrelians, while humans continue reconstruction operations, we experience net negative returns. The resources spent on military actions exceed any strategic gains achieved, especially when those gains are erased by human constructors within days. What if we target the human ships? Krisha asked. Remove their ability to rebuild? We evaluated that option extensively. To destroy the human constructor fleet would require a sustained campaign involving 60 to 70% of our forces. During that campaign, the Vrelians would gain substantial territorial advantages. Additionally, attacking neutral human vessels would likely trigger sanctions from every neutral power in the galaxy. We would win the battle but lose the economic and political war. And there is one more factor we must consider. The economist brought up specifications for the human ships. Our intelligence services have completed detailed analysis of human construction technology. Admiral, if we had access to their methods, we could revolutionize our entire industrial base. Construction times would decrease by a factor of 10. Resource efficiency would improve dramatically. But acquiring this technology requires cooperation with humans, which means ending the war on their terms. Krisha understood the trap she was in. The humans had created a situation where the logical choice, the choice any Cathari strategist would recommend, was to make peace. Not because peace was morally superior or ethically right, but because it was tactically advantageous. They had weaponized logic itself. While the commanders struggled with impossible decisions, the human reconstruction effort accelerated. More worlds requested assistance, and humans accepted every request. They rebuilt Vrelian colonies destroyed by Cathari attacks. They restored Cathari stations damaged by Vrelian raids. They even began working on neutral worlds that had been caught in the crossfire, places that both sides had written off as acceptable losses. The work was not just fast, it was transformative. Human engineers did not simply restore what had been destroyed. They upgraded everything they touched. Power systems became more efficient. Water purification became more effective. Agricultural systems produced higher yields. Communication networks operated faster and more reliably. A Vrelian colony called Threshnor had been bombed 18 months earlier. The attack had destroyed the main city and killed 30,000 civilians. The survivors had been living in temporary shelters ever since, struggling to grow enough food to survive. Both Vrelian and Cathari governments had promised aid, but that aid never materialized. The war consumed all available resources. When human constructors arrived at Threshnor, the survivors were skeptical. They had heard promises before, but within 24 hours they watched as the first new housing structures went up. Within a week, power was restored to the entire settlement. Within 2 weeks, new agricultural facilities were producing food at levels exceeding pre-war output. The human project manager, a woman named Sarah Chen, walked through the rebuilt areas with the colony's leader, an elderly Vrelian named Cathazar who had lost 3 children in the bombing. "Why do you do this?" Cathazar asked her. "We are not your people. This is not your war. You risk nothing by staying away, yet you come here and give us back our lives. I do not understand human thinking." Chen stopped walking and looked at the new buildings around them. "My grandmother lived through the Third World War on Earth. She was 10 years old when nuclear weapons destroyed her city. She survived in a shelter for 2 years while the surface was uninhabitable. When the war finally ended, she spent the rest of her life building things. Houses, schools, hospitals, anything useful. She said that after seeing so much destruction, she needed to prove that creation was possible." She turned to face Cathzar directly. "Humanity nearly destroyed itself, Elder. We came so close to making our world uninhabitable that we can still taste the fear in our cultural memory. When we finally stopped fighting and started building, we made a promise to ourselves. If we ever found other species making the same mistakes we did, we would help them, not because we expect gratitude or repayment, but because we know how easy it is to fall into the trap of endless war, and we know how hard it is to climb back out." Cathzar was quiet for a long moment. "You are unusual creatures, humans. You have turned your trauma into compassion. Most species turn trauma into aggression. Most species have not yet learned what we learned," Chen replied. "But they can. That is what we are trying to show the galaxy." Similar conversations were happening on dozens of worlds across the conflict zones. Humans worked alongside local populations, sharing their methods and teaching their techniques. They did not keep secrets or guard their technology jealously. Instead, they openly explained how everything worked and encouraged others to learn and adapt the methods for themselves. This openness had an unexpected effect. Engineers from neutral species began studying human construction methods and implementing them in their own systems. Within a month, the efficiency increases were measurable. Worlds that adopted human techniques saw construction times drop and quality improve. The economic advantages became impossible to ignore. Several major corporations based in neutral territory approached human authorities with business proposals. They wanted to license human technology and pay substantial fees for the rights to use it. The human response shocked the entire business community. Captain Vasquez, now serving as humanity's official representative to the Galactic Council, made the announcement personally. "Humanity will not license our construction technology. Instead, we are making all technical specifications, engineering documents, and training materials available to any species that wants them, free of charge. No patents, no fees, no restrictions. We want these methods to spread as widely and as quickly as possible." The announcement caused chaos in galactic financial markets. Technology companies saw their stock values plummet as their most valuable assets, proprietary construction methods, became instantly obsolete. But infrastructure companies and construction firms saw their value soar as they realized they could now build things faster and cheaper than ever before. The economic implications rippled outward at faster than light speed. Species that had been struggling to maintain their infrastructure suddenly found themselves able to modernize at affordable costs. Worlds that had been dependent on expensive imports could now manufacture many goods locally. The entire galactic economy began shifting in ways that had not been seen in centuries. And throughout all of this, the war continued, but it was dying. Every day, fewer shots were fired. Every week, more soldiers requested transfers to reconstruction duties. Every month, more worlds withdrew from the conflict and sought human assistance. Commander Thrazakor finally made his decision on the 43rd day after the human fleet's arrival. He called an emergency session of the Vrelian High Council and presented them with the data his analysts had compiled. "We are losing this war," he told them bluntly. "Not to the Cathari, but to irrelevance. Our alliance has lost 18 member worlds to neutral status. Our soldiers are transferring to non-combat roles in record numbers. Our economy is straining under military expenditures that produce no lasting strategic gains. And most importantly, our people are losing faith in the purpose of this conflict." The High Council debated for 6 hours before reaching their conclusion. They would send an official delegation to negotiate peace terms with the Cathari, with human observers present to mediate. It was not a surrender. It was a recognition that the war could no longer be won through military means. Admiral Krisha reached a similar conclusion through characteristically different reasoning. She presented her strategic council with a detailed cost-benefit analysis that demonstrated conclusively that peace was more advantageous than continued warfare. The Cathari alliance voted to enter negotiations within hours of receiving her report. The news broke on the 47th day after the human fleet's arrival. After 47 years of war, almost to the day, both sides had agreed to begin formal peace negotiations. The date was not lost on anyone. It seemed fitting that a war which had lasted 47 years would end exactly 47 days after humanity decided to intervene. Captain Vasquez received the news aboard the Perseverance, which was currently supervising reconstruction operations in the HFY system. Her crew cheered when the announcement came through, but Vasquez remained cautious. Peace negotiations can fail, she reminded them. We have seen it before in human history. The hard part is not getting people to the negotiating table. The hard part is making sure they stay there long enough to reach actual agreement. But humanity had not finished playing their cards. On the day the peace negotiations were scheduled to begin, Vasquez transmitted a message to both sides that contained humanity's final surprise. Gentlemen, we have prepared detailed reconstruction plans for every damaged world in your territories. These plans include resource requirements, timeline projections, and labor estimates. We have also prepared training programs to teach your engineers our construction methods. Everything you need to rebuild your civilizations is ready. There is only one condition. She paused for effect before continuing. Both sides must participate in reconstruction efforts in each other's territories. Vrelian engineers will help rebuild Cathari colonies. Cathari construction teams will help restore Vrelian worlds. You will work together side by side, building instead of destroying. This is not negotiable. If you want our assistance with reconstruction, this is the price. The response was predictable. Both sides objected immediately. The idea of former enemies working together on such intimate terms was unthinkable. But Vasquez had anticipated this reaction and was prepared for it. Let me be very clear, she said firmly. Humanity will continue reconstruction operations with or without your cooperation. But if you choose to work together, the process will go much faster, and you will learn the techniques that will allow you to maintain and improve your infrastructure independently. If you refuse, we will still rebuild everything, but you will remain dependent on human assistance for years to come. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. We begin the joint training programs in 1 week, with or without your participation. It was a masterful piece of strategic manipulation. The humans had made peace not just beneficial but necessary, not just desirable but essential for long-term independence. They had created a situation where the only path forward required former enemies to become, if not friends, at least colleagues. The Treaty of Perseverance was signed 3 weeks after negotiations began. It was the fastest major peace treaty in galactic history, and the terms were unlike anything that had come before. There were no territorial concessions, no reparations, no assignment of blame or acknowledgement of guilt. Instead, the treaty focused entirely on the future. Both the Vrelian Dominion and the Cathari Alliance agreed to reduce their military forces by 40% over the next 5 years. The resources saved would be redirected to reconstruction and infrastructure development. Both sides would participate in the Reconstruction Initiative, a joint program administered by human observers that would rebuild every damaged world in their territories. Most significantly, the treaty established the Galactic Construction Corps, a multinational organization that would continue the work humans had started. Species from across the galaxy could join, contributing their own expertise to reconstruction efforts anywhere they were needed. Humans would provide training and technical support, but the Corps would be independent and self-governing. The treaty was not perfect. There were objections from hardliners on both sides who felt betrayed by their leaders. Some border disputes remained unresolved. Old hatreds did not disappear overnight. But the treaty provided something that had been missing for 47 years, a framework for ending the violence and moving forward. Commander Thrazakor signed the treaty with 3 of his 4 hands, a gesture of profound commitment in Vrelian culture. Admiral Krisha signed with a traditional Cathari blessing for new beginnings, and Captain Elena Vasquez, representing humanity, signed last with a simple statement that would be quoted across the galaxy for generations to come. We sign this document not as victors or mediators, but as fellow builders. We hope that someday all species will choose construction over destruction, creation over violence, and hope over hatred. The real work began immediately after the signing ceremony. True to her word, Vasquez had prepared comprehensive training programs for both Vrelian and Cathari engineers. The first classes began within days, with students from both species learning side by side about human construction methods. The initial sessions were tense. Vrelian and Cathari students sat on opposite sides of the classroom, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when necessary. Their instructors, human engineers with decades of experience, recognized the dynamic immediately. They had seen similar situations in Earth's corporate wars, when former enemies had to learn to work together. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. They gave the students an impossible problem and told them they had to solve it, together or fail individually. The problem involved designing a reconstruction plan for a world that had been heavily damaged by both sides. The world had Vrelian and Cathari populations living in separate areas, each requiring different infrastructure based on their biological needs. The challenge was to create a unified design that served both communities efficiently while minimizing resource waste. For the first 2 days, the students tried to work separately, with each group designing solutions for their own species and ignoring the other side. Every design they submitted was rejected by the instructors for being inefficient or incomplete. On the third day, a young Vrelian engineer named Shaltok and a Cathari named Vrina started talking during a break. "Your people prefer higher ambient temperatures," Shaltok observed, looking at Vrina's design. "But the thermal regulation system you designed uses significant power. What if we combined our systems? My design has excess thermal capacity that we could redirect to your habitation areas." Vrina studied his schematics with her sharp eyes. "That could work. And your water purification system is redundant with ours. If we merged them and used your distribution network, we would save 17% on resource costs." By the end of the day, Shaltok and Vrina had combined their designs into something that was genuinely better than either individual effort. Their instructors approved the plan and presented it to the rest of the class as an example of effective collaboration. The moment was a turning point. Other students began working across species lines, sharing ideas and combining approaches. Within a week, the classroom that had been divided by species had reorganized itself into mixed teams working on increasingly complex problems. This pattern repeated itself across dozens of training facilities. Former enemies found common ground in the technical challenges of reconstruction. They discovered that Vrelian engineering strength complemented Cathari design elegance. They learned that working together produced results that neither species could achieve alone. The training program lasted 3 months. When it ended, 5,000 newly certified engineers deployed to reconstruction sites across both territories. They worked in mixed teams, exactly as Captain Vasquez had planned. A Vrelian and a Cathari working together on a bombed-out city, an insectoid and an avian solving problems side by side, former enemies becoming, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, colleagues and eventually friends. The results were remarkable. Worlds that had been devastated by the war began transforming with incredible speed. Cities rose from ruins. Agricultural systems came back online. Infrastructure that had taken generations to build originally was restored and improved in months. But the real transformation was not physical, it was cultural. As former enemies worked together, they began to understand each other in ways that decades of diplomatic negotiations had never achieved. They shared meals, exchanged stories, and slowly built the kind of relationships that made future conflicts much less likely. Commander Thraskor, now officially retired from military service and serving as a civilian administrator for reconstruction efforts, visited one of the first completed projects 6 months after the treaty signing. The world was called Vrelin Minor, a small colony that had been completely destroyed early in the war. He walked through the new capital city with a mixed group of Vrelian and Cathari engineers who had led the reconstruction. The city was beautiful, combining elements of both architectural traditions into something unique and harmonious. Buildings stood tall with Vrelian strength and Cathari grace. Parks incorporated plants from both homeworlds. Public spaces were designed to accommodate both species comfortably. "This is not what I expected," Thrascore admitted to the project lead, a human woman named Lisa Chang. I thought you would simply rebuild what was destroyed. Instead, you have created something new. Chang smiled. That's the whole point, Commander. We're not trying to return to the past. The past led to war. We're building a future where both species can thrive together. Every world we rebuild, we try to make it better than before. Not just physically better, but socially better. Places where different species can live and work together naturally. She gestured to a nearby plaza, where Vrelian and Cathari civilians were mingling freely, something that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. That's what we learned from Earth's history. Peace doesn't come from separating former enemies. It comes from integrating them, giving them shared goals and shared spaces, making cooperation more beneficial than conflict. Admiral Krisha, also retired and now serving as chief strategist for the Reconstruction Initiative, reached similar conclusions from a different angle. She compiled a comprehensive report analyzing the first year of reconstruction efforts and presented it to the Galactic Council. The human intervention was successful not because of superior technology, though their construction methods are undeniably advanced. It was successful because they understood something we had forgotten. Warfare is fundamentally an economic activity. It consumes resources and produces outcomes. When they made the outcome worthless by rebuilding everything we destroyed, they made warfare economically irrational. But they went further. They made peace economically advantageous by offering reconstruction assistance and technology sharing. They changed the fundamental equation that governs interspecies conflict. Her report became required reading in strategic academies across the galaxy. The human constructor doctrine was analyzed, debated, and gradually adopted by other species. The idea that the best defense was not a bigger weapon but the ability to make weapons irrelevant spread throughout galactic military thinking. But perhaps the most significant moment came not from any government or military organization, but from a simple memorial service. 5 years after the Treaty of Perseverance was signed, both the Vrelian Dominion and Cathari Alliance held a joint ceremony, honoring those who had died in the 47-year war. The ceremony took place on a neutral world that had been rebuilt by mixed teams of Vrelian, Cathari, and human engineers. Millions attended in person, and billions watched across the galaxy. Former enemies stood together, sharing grief and remembering the terrible cost of the conflict they had finally ended. Captain Vasquez, now Ambassador Vasquez with a permanent position on the Galactic Council, attended the ceremony at the personal invitation of both Thrascore and Krisha. As she stood between the two former commanders, watching as representatives from both species read names of the fallen, she felt the weight of what humanity had accomplished. After the ceremony, a young reporter asked her a question that had been on many minds. Ambassador, humanity ended a 47-year war without firing a single shot. You conquered through construction rather than destruction. How did you know this approach would work? Vasquez thought carefully before answering. We did not know it would work. We hoped it would work, because we had seen what happens when it does not. Earth nearly destroyed itself because we kept choosing violence over cooperation. We kept believing that winning meant defeating the enemy, rather than making enemies unnecessary. When we finally learned that lesson, it saved our species. We wanted to share that lesson with the galaxy, not because we are wise, but because we are traumatized. We know what it looks like when a civilization tears itself apart, and we did not want to watch it happen again. She paused, looking at the memorial where thousands of names were carved into stone. People sometimes ask me if humanity is peaceful. We are not. We are capable of tremendous violence just like any species, but we are also capable of learning from our mistakes, and we chose to build rather than destroy because we know the cost of the alternative. Every human carries the memory of how close we came to extinction. That memory drives everything we do. The reporter pressed further. Some people say that humanity has become the most powerful force in the galaxy through this intervention, that you effectively conquered without weapons. How do you respond to that? Vasquez smiled slightly, a hint of sadness in her expression. If we wanted to conquer, we could have built weapons instead of hospitals. We could have built dreadnoughts instead of schools. We have the technology and the resources, but we chose a different path because we learned something important. The species that survives is not the one that fights best. It is the one that adapts best. And we adapted by learning to build faster than anyone can destroy. She turned to look directly at the camera, knowing her words would be heard across the entire galaxy. Humanity did not end the Vrelian-Cathari War to prove we were powerful. We did it to prove that war itself could be made obsolete. We did it to show that there is another way, a better way than endless cycles of violence and retribution. And we did it because we were terrified of becoming what we used to be. Every ship we build, every world we restore, every engineer we train is a rejection of our violent past and an investment in a peaceful future. She gestured to the memorial and the mixed crowd of species gathered around it. This is what we wanted. Not dominance, not control, not territory, just this. Former enemies standing together, remembering the past but choosing to build a different future. If that makes us powerful, then we accept that power. But we will use it only for building, never for destroying. 10 years after the Treaty of Perseverance, the transformation of the galaxy was undeniable. The Vrelian-Cathari War had ended completely, with no resurgence of violence. The reconstructed worlds were thriving, their populations more prosperous than before the conflict. The Galactic Construction Corps had grown into a major organization, employing millions from dozens of species. But more importantly, the culture of the galaxy had shifted. Warfare had not been eliminated, that would have been unrealistic, but it had become rare and brief. When conflicts did arise, species now looked first to economic and construction-based solutions rather than military ones. The idea that you could win by making your opponent's victories meaningless had fundamentally changed strategic thinking. The Perseverance itself had become a symbol. The massive ship, now permanently stationed in orbit around the rebuilt world of Talos IV, served as a training facility and museum. Young people from across the galaxy visited to learn about human construction methods and to understand the philosophy behind them. Captain Elena Vasquez, now elderly and preparing for retirement, stood in the observation deck of the Perseverance one last time. She looked out at the planet below, thriving and peaceful, and thought about the journey that had brought humanity to this moment. Earth had nearly destroyed itself. Humans had fought wars that killed billions and came within hours of making their homeworld uninhabitable. They had experienced the depths of hatred and the consequences of choosing violence over cooperation. And from that terrible crucible, they had learned lessons that they hoped would help other species avoid the same mistakes. The human approach had not been perfect. There had been setbacks and challenges. Some worlds had rejected human assistance. Some species had been suspicious of human motives. And there were still those who believed that military strength, not construction capability, was the true measure of power. But the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had ended a galactic war without firing a shot. They had conquered through construction rather than destruction. They had proven that the greatest strength was not the ability to destroy, but the ability to make destruction irrelevant. As Vasquez prepared to leave the ship that had been her home for 15 years, she recorded one final message for the archives. It was simple and direct, like everything about the human approach had been. To future generations who study this period of history, I want you to understand one thing. We did not end the war because we were clever or powerful or morally superior. We ended it because we were terrified. Terrified of repeating our own mistakes. Terrified of watching other species destroy themselves the way we nearly did. Terrified of becoming the kind of species that chooses violence when building is possible. That fear drove us to become the greatest builders in the galaxy. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Sometimes the best things we create come not from confidence but from the desperate need to be better than we were. She paused, looking out at the stars one last time from the deck of the ship that had changed the galaxy. We did not fire a single shot because we knew that every shot fired is a failure of imagination. A failure to see alternatives. A failure to understand that winning is not about defeating your enemy. It is about making the concept of enemies obsolete. That is what humanity learned. That is what we tried to teach. And that is what we hope will be our lasting contribution to the galaxy. Not the ships we built or the worlds we restored, but the idea that there is always another way. Always a choice to build instead of destroy. Always hope for something better. The message ended. The recording was stored in the archives of the Perseverance, available to anyone who wanted to understand how humanity had changed the galaxy. And throughout the stars, on hundreds of worlds rebuilt from the ashes of war, people of many species looked up at the night sky and knew that somewhere out there, humans were still building, always building, because they remembered what it was like when they chose to destroy.